So I think we'll get started now. And my name's Leslie Lampton. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Ridgefield Library. And now I'm just going to pass it over to Marilyn Carroll, who's president of the Ridgefield League of Women Voters. Thanks, Marilyn.
Thanks very much, Leslie. Good morning, everyone. And as president of the League of Women Voters of Ridgefield, I'd really like to thank you all for attending our Meet Your Legislators meeting today. The League and the Library present this program every year so that our legislators can let us know what is happening in the current legislative session in Hartford, where some of them were until 2 o'clock this morning via Zoom. And they can let us know what is happening in the current legislative session in Hartford, as I said, and to discuss the bills before them that are of particular interest to us all. Now, before I turn this meeting over to Mrs. Linda Hanley, our program chair, who has moderated this meeting so professionally for so many years, I'd just like to mention two of our virtual upcoming events co-sponsored by the library. One will be on May 27th with Myrna Perez, the director of Brennan Center's Voting Rights and Elections program. And the other, which is right around the corner, is one of our Get to Know Your Town meetings on April 20th at 11 a.m., featuring our very own Ridgefield Library. And you know, there are many extraordinary women leading and working at our library. And since March is Women's History Month, I'd just like to recognize one of them. She has been instrumental in supporting the partnership between the League and the library, someone you all know and I'm sure appreciate as well. The library's adult program coordinator, Leslie Lampton, who you just saw and we have seen so often in the past year, organizing, hosting, and moderating so many of the library's virtual programs. Leslie's intelligence, creativity, grace, and generosity is evident in everything she does. She has been an exceptional partner for the League for many years, helping us put on the kinds of programming that educates, informs, and entertains this community. And we officially want to thank her for her guidance, patience, and expertise. Now, without further delay, here is Mrs. Hanley, who will introduce our legislators and read as many of the questions that have been submitted by the League and the community members that time allows. Thanks very much, Leslie and Linda, you're on.
Thank you very much. Happy spring, everyone. This is the first time I have been involved in one of these Meet Your Legislator mornings that I haven't worried about snow. So away we go on this beautiful spring morning. I am going to introduce the legislators and ask them at first to tell you their committee assignments and a brief take on how they feel the session is going so far into the session on March 20th. Then, as usual, I am going to ask the questions that are of interest to the League of Women Voters of Connecticut, and then I will go to your constituent questions. There are quite a few of them. What we have done is we have bunched them by topic, and you will see what you will do is you'll get tired of hearing my voice by the end of this. So away we go. I'd like to start with Representative Berger-Girvalo, then Representative Gucker, then Representative Haskell as they introduce themselves.
Okay, I guess that's me. Hi, I am Aimee Berger-Girvalo, your newest representative. I am on the Environment, Public Health, and Transportation committees, and having really no frame of reference for what a session looked like before, I will say that I have been very excited to see how much in this Zoom world, how much access citizens, residents, everybody has access to Hartford now in a way that they didn't before. And I've been really, really thrilled to see so many people from our little tiny corner way out here in Connecticut to be represented as frequently as they have in hearings and watching meetings, things that they would never have had access to before. So as far as I am concerned, I feel that the world of the Connecticut General Assembly has opened up to Connecticut, and it's certainly opening up to me in ways that are exciting and definitely a lot of hard work is happening. So that's kind of my take on what's going on right now.
Well, good morning, all. I am State Representative Ken Gucker. I represent a little piece of Ridgefield, a little piece of New Fairfield, and a rather large piece of Danbury. I serve with Aimee on the Environment Board, but but I also serve with Will. I believe Will's also on environment, planning development, and also banks. And as Aimee has said, yes, the Zoom world dealing with COVID has taught us how to get more access to people. We feel that more people have been able to participate in the process because of this. But if anything, it's also, I think, made our meetings a little longer. I mean, I know this morning, Aimee and I were up till 2 o'clock in an environment committee. So if I look a little disheveled, it's called sleep deprivation. But anyway, I look forward to hearing your questions, your concerns. And as always, we are here to help and here to serve. Thank you very much for having me.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Will Haskell. I represent the 26th District in the State Senate. That includes Ridgefield as well as 6 other communities. I was elected in 2018 and was so honored when this community gave me the chance to continue serving in 2020. It's a great honor to work alongside my friends Ken and Aimee. I serve as the chairman of the Transportation Committee. I also serve as the vice chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. Since this is a League of Women Voters event, I'm sure we'll be talking about some of the important work to make our elections more accessible and convenient. I also serve on the Environment Committee, the Energy and Technology Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Public Health Committee, and the Higher Education Committee. So it's a really busy time, and I just got a new appointment this week, which is to serve on the Senate Screening Committee, which is essentially a small group that looks at every bill after it passes the committee and before it reaches the Senate floor to make sure that it's something that we as a caucus want to support. So anyways, it's a great honor to serve this community, especially during this trying time. I will say that I think what sticks out most to me about this legislative session is partially what my colleague said. It's more accessible than ever before. Folks don't need to drive up to Hartford, take a day off of work, find childcare in order to participate in the legislative process. You can testify from the comfort and safety of your own home. But also what sticks out to me is that we are legislating at the same time as the state grapples with a historic health crisis, with the worst recession since the Great Depression. And I think now more than ever, people are cognizant of the important role that state government plays. And they're looking for a government that can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We need to make sure that we're distributing vaccines in a manner that's efficient and equitable, but we also need to have a conversation about why healthcare is so expensive in the first place. We're talking about expanding telehealth to make sure that people can continue to see their doctor, but we're also planning for a world in which we need to invest in public transit and get the state moving again. So anyways, there's a lot going on. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to move to the questions posed by the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. Each local league in the state has these Meet Your Legislator meetings, so we can get the legislators' answers and get you constituents an opportunity to ask your questions as well. The first 2 questions deal with the league's support of protecting, maximizing, expanding voter rights and access. The first question, and I'll ask Senator Haskell to begin. Do you support an amendment to Article 6 in the state constitution to permit an elector to cast a ballot at a designated location prior to the day of election?
Absolutely, I do, Linda. Thank you so much for that question. Connecticut is one of only 7 states that doesn't allow voters to participate sometime before Election Day. This isn't a red state issue or a blue state issue. Texas has nearly 30 days of early voting. Last I checked, West Virginia has 2 weeks of early voting. Tens of millions of voters cast their ballot before Election Day in the 2020 election, but none of them lived in Connecticut because we have these antiquated voting laws. We've got to do better, not just because our democracy is better when more people have an opportunity to participate, but because our antiquated voting system makes it especially difficult for commuters, for single parents, for students, for people with disabilities, for a variety, for so many people. Having only 1 day to vote poses a very real inconvenience, and as a result, their voices really aren't given the attention that they deserve in our democratic system. So I absolutely support amending the Constitution. I voted for it in 2019. I'll vote for it again in 2021.
Okay, Representative Berger-Girvalo, do you want to go next?
I would agree. I would echo everything that Senator Haskell just said. His statistics are correct. We have 43 other states that do this and DC, and we don't. I think it's important to understand, what does this process mean? This amendment just permits the General Assembly the right to make the laws that provide for early voting. We are not making a dramatic constitutional change, and it's not a mandate, and the public will still get to weigh in. So but democracy only works if we're all able to participate. So yes, I completely support this.
Okay, Representative Gucker.
Absolutely. There's not much more to add. I as well as Will, supported this in 2019. But also we've seen how much people can be involved in their government when they have more access and they have more time. This COVID environment has shown us that with Zoom, as we were talking about earlier, how so many more people can participate in areas that they normally wouldn't be able to, only because of having the access, the convenience, and being able to come in. We also saw record numbers in the last elections of absentee voting, which I believe we should also expand. No excuse absentee ballots should also be on the table this year. It's great. So yes, I support wholeheartedly.
Okay, the second question, speaking of absentee ballots, is do you support an amendment to Article 6 of the state constitution to allow any qualified elector to, regardless of reason, cast an absentee ballot instead of appearing at a polling place on the day of election? And Representative Berger-Girvalo, you can go first. You
can call me any portion of that name, BP or do, it doesn't matter. You can also call me Aimee.
Okay.
That's a tricky one. Yes, again, I completely support this. The amendment removes this from the Constitution, and it leaves the state statute. The distinction, I think, once again, everybody gets really confused about what this really means. Language of this nature should be in statute, not in the Constitution. That's what we're saying here, and I support that.
Representative Gucker?
Like I stated earlier, yes, I would support this. In fact, in 2019, we did get a bill out of the House that would have expanded absentee ballots. Unfortunately, we didn't get it across the line, and I'm hoping that this year we do. It is important that we get this through.
Okay, Senator Haskell.
Well, I agree with everything my colleague said. I would just add that I want to thank the League of Women Voters for their advocacy on this. And I think it's evidence about the fact that this is not about who you vote for. It's about making sure that you have an opportunity to vote. The League of Women Voters is as nonpartisan as it gets. And yet for years, this organization has been encouraging legislators to create more convenient access to the ballot. And a nuance here is that in 2020, Connecticut actually removed that requirement that there be an excuse for an absentee ballot. And it was not a coincidence that turnout absolutely surged. Based on the numbers that I've seen in Connecticut, we saw about 80% of registered voters turn out. In fact, the 2020 election saw 133,000 more voters in Connecticut than the last presidential election. And the Senate district that I represent, it had the highest turnout of any district across the state. More than 66,000 people voted. That's a 9,000 vote increase since the last election. And it was because our elections became more accessible and convenient. Everybody had the opportunity to vote from home if they preferred to do so. Why now would we let that progress roll back? We've got to make sure that this opportunity that citizens availed themselves of and actually really appreciated in 2020 doesn't then go away in 2021 or 2022.
Okay, we'll move on to the second group of questions, or it's actually one question. Census and presidential election year was 2020. That means throughout the states in the United States, 2021 is redistricting based on the census. Connecticut has, by constitution, certain markers of dates when a committee has to be formed and the report has to be made public. What the League is asking, and I'm asking here this question, how can you as legislators ensure that the public will have opportunities to testify and that the process is open and transparent? And this would be as we proceed through the year with redistricting for the Connecticut General Assembly and for the US Congress.
Linda, do you have a preference of who goes first, or should we just jump?
Now I just jump in.
Okay, I'll just say very briefly that this is a historic moment. Obviously, it only happens every 10 years. We've got to make sure that we get this right. The process, to be honest, the committee's been formed, but I don't think that the process has started in earnest, largely because legislators have been so busy with this legislative session. But it's critically important that the public plays a role. And I look forward, I'm not on the committee myself, some of my colleagues are. I look forward to testifying in support of maps that are fair and rational and make sure that every community has a voice. There's one thing that is really important to me and that is quite pressing, and that's the fact that incarcerated people are currently counted in the town in which they are incarcerated. In other words, Cheshire, which is a town that happens to have a lot of prisons, has a population that seems much bigger than it is. So they get more funding for roads and for schools because the incarcerated people who live there are counted by the census as being residents of that town. But of course, if you're incarcerated in Cheshire, you're not using the local roads or the local schools or visiting the local park. And in fact, you should probably be counted instead in the community where you lived prior to incarceration. Since we know that many of the folks who are incarcerated originally lived in the New Haven area, the Bridgeport area, the Hartford area, increasing the amount that we count those populations would make sure that more funding goes towards roads, schools, and public parks in our urban communities. And I think that this is a really crucial part of undoing the racial injustice that is prison gerrymandering. So we've got a bill in the Government Administration and Elections Committee. I view it as must pass because we only have a chance to get this right once every 10 years, as you said. And this is a bill that needs to pass in the next few months in order for the redistricting process to accurately count where incarcerated people are actually members of the community, not the town in which they happen to be incarcerated.
I completely agree with Will on that. It's a really critical part of looking at what the numbers really reflect. But even kind of shifting gears a little bit, one of the question was really also about open and transparent processes. And I've been very encouraged by conversations that I've had with leadership in the House and with other legislators who have been part of the process in the past. Public hearings will certainly be part of this, but also not just getting information from those in our communities, but also there's going to be a very aggressive push to get the information that we have as we have it out to the public and about the process and about the data and about the decisions that will be made because of it. So I am very encouraged by the desire to be as transparent as we could ever be.
And if I could add to that, everything to not repeat what's already been said. I think the question was more over how we as legislators can make sure that people are heard. I think we can use the very tools that we use all the time to reach out to our communities, whether it be e-blasts or it would be messaging or other social media methods, mailers, things to ensure that this is your opportunity to have your voice heard, to hear your concerns, and to make sure that we hear what you need to say. I think this delegation has been very approachable on just about every issue. And I think it's important that the people reach out to us and say, look, you know what, here's the experience that I have in my community. Here's how I'd like to see this go. Danbury went through this a number of years ago with redistricting our wards. Danbury has 7 wards in the city. We're 40 square miles. And there was a redistricting done because of population shift. And usually when you're doing your redistricting, you try to keep within 3% of change to keep things equal and fair and balanced. And we did have issues where there were some people that tried to, gerrymander yet again districts, and that is not fair for anybody. So that's why it is important that people come out and make their voices heard, because that happened in Danbury, and yet we wound up with fairly divided up districts to where people were equally represented. So as far as what can we do, we will be a pain in the neck on this. We will be sending out e-blasts. We will be sending out mailers. We will be flooding your inbox with, we need to hear from you, because this is the one time in 10 years you have an opportunity to be really part of the process. So other than that, okay. I don't know, get a bullhorn and drive around town like in the Blues Brothers. I don't know.
Okay, well, that's an idea. Going on to open government, transparency, transparency and the public's right to know and follow the decision-making process of our state government. So this first question is, does CTN, which is the public legislature's TV service, have adequate resources to repeat coverage of the redistricting process as well as coverage of the regular legislative session in 2021?
I can jump in on that if that's
Okay.
something, if we're okay with that. I actually do. I've spent a lot of time. I'm sorry. I have to stand up and sit down because I have a bit of a herniated disc issue. So I apologize. I'll be moving quite a bit. So I have looked into CTN because I really didn't know a whole lot about it before. And I've been really, again, encouraged by I think that they have adequate resources to fully cover the redistricting process, which does happen generally outside of the session, most of that work. So to be able to have that kind of access is certainly critical, and I have a lot of faith in them. I have seen I have rewatched all of the hearings that we've been a part of, ones that I haven't been able to be a part of because I was in my own, and I have only found consistency in their ability to get whatever information we are putting out there, and I think it's certainly a reliable source for this kind of communication.
Yeah, I might add also to that CTN a number of years ago, certain people tried to defund CTN because they felt that we should spend monies at other places, but not that we don't have a number of places we could use more financing and some funding. It is also extremely important that the people have an opportunity to be part of their legislature and part of their government. And many times, even before Zoom, CTN was the only way that people could actually watch what their local officials and their elected officials were doing, but listen into many of the questions and many of the concerns that were being brought up, and then be able to respond at a later date if necessary. But CTN is a valuable tool. CTN, and like Aimee had said earlier, I've had to go back and watch CTN again because there's sometimes you may miss a testimony. It might have been that one moment in the Zoom meeting where you said, I have to get up and get a cup of coffee and stretch my legs, and you come back and you miss something valuable. So it allowed you to go back. So I think when it comes down to the redistricting, I think it's very important because it would be a tool that you have a recorded record that all the legislators can come back to, all of the committee that is dealing with redistricting can come back to, and really check in on what the true intent of the public was and what their feelings and their concerns were. Very valuable tool, and I think it makes our world a lot easier.
I think my grandparents planted this question because they're watching they watch CTN nonstop and never hesitate to provide their strong feedback on how I vote. CTN is wonderful. I would only say that the downside of it these days is there are so many meetings happening at once. Sometimes the Environment Committee is meeting at the same time as the GAE Committee is meeting at the same time as the Judiciary Committee. If you're frustrated that you can only watch one of those because CTN is a single channel, if you are thirsty for more action from the General Assembly, go to YouTube. That's what I use. CTN has a YouTube channel where they have multiple streams. You can watch any meeting that's going on. It's a wonderful resource, and I hope more people take advantage of it.
Okay, second question in this area. How can citizens follow the process for the General Assembly districts as well as the congressional districts?
I think Will just kind of hit on that with being able to access the information is out there on the YouTube channel. It's all, I mean, it's kind of almost the same answer as before. It's really just accessible through CTN and the other. There's also you can sign up for e-blasts with each of us, and we get that information out. You can look at our social media. That's all, as many ways as we can get information out. I know that certainly with this delegation here, we are all about that. So it's certainly not, there are no barriers in being able to access this.
And I might add that I can't speak for the congressional delegation. I think we at the state delegation do a lot of reach out and a lot of talking with our constituents and spending a lot of time, in the public forum, making sure that people have access. So Yes, like Aimee has said, watching CTN, watching for those emails. But I will also tell you one thing, using our local our local newspapers and things of that sort. I had an interview done by a project I'm working for, not in Ridgefield, but in Danbury and New Fairfield, to where at the end of the interview, I had not put in their contact information because I wasn't simply asked about how to get a hold of me or anything. The next day after this article came up, my personal email, my state email, and my phone was bombarded by support from constituents who said, I really like this. So you know what? Having that ability to be out there and be available to people, people will find you. And if there's any message that we can make maybe here, make sure you reach out to us, good or bad. If we're only getting good, glowing stuff, we think everything's going wonderful. But we also need to hear about those negative and those bad things as well, because we can't hold people accountable or we can't fix the problem if we don't know it's broken. Use the tools. We are here.
Senator Haskell, did you have?
I would just say ditto. I think that my colleagues covered it pretty well.
Okay, the third question is really very similar to the other questions. What other resources are available besides CT and YouTube that allow for transparency and open government?
I'm happy to jump in here.
Okay.
Members of Congress represent almost 1 million people. Members of the legislature represent far smaller districts, right? A state representative, I think, represents about 10,000 people. A state Senate district is about 100,000 people. If you want to pick up the phone and give us a call, you'll probably reach us on our cell phones, or you'll get a call back shortly. We can't do our jobs unless we hear from you, and we really do rely on that direct communication because our districts are relatively small. If we get 10, 20, or 30 phone calls, text messages, or emails about an issue, all of a sudden that issue is going to take priority in our day and in our week and perhaps in that legislative session. So one thing that I find kind of frustrating is, especially among my generation, I see a lot of people on Instagram or Facebook saying, call the White House, call Mitch McConnell, call Chuck Schumer. You're going to reach a switchboard, or you're going to talk to a very polite intern. But if you call your state senator, or if you call your state representative, you're going to get us on our cell phones, and we really want to hear what you have to say, and it's going to influence the votes that we cast. So this isn't anything novel or innovative that I'm proposing, but please pick up the phone and give us a call, talk to us. If you're frustrated about how we vote, rather than resorting to social media, maybe just spend a few minutes chatting with us so that we can better understand one another. Even if we don't agree, we certainly want to hear from you and better understand the communities we represent. So nothing too new there, but please give us a call.
And if I can add also, if we don't hear from you, we can't fix it. I can't tell you how many people have reached out with personal problems, what we're seeing, what we may be seeing more of, unfortunately, going forward is, the results and the side effects of this COVID virus. As things begin to go back to what will be the new norm, we're going to find that people are going to have problems paying the mortgage. They're going to have problems being able to pay their rent, pay their utilities. All the forgiveness programs that have been put into place are all temporary. So as we go forward and these things start to go away, we're going to start seeing a lot of people that we wouldn't normally be dealing with going through some really hard times. And that's when it's important to reach out to us and others and say, look, you know what, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay my electric bill. I don't know what I'm going to do about paying my mortgage. And I know a lot of this we've been dealing with, in the Capitol. Serving on the banking committee as vice chair, we've been dealing with a lot of foreclosure mediation stuff and a lot of loan forgiveness type bills to help people be able to get help after this is over with. But we need to hear from you. So if you have a problem, no matter what it is, I mean, we're very discreet. You're not going to go stick it all over the internet. But we can reach you out to the resources of how we can get you some assistance. I had a gentleman the other day. I just happened to be going to the junkyard. As many of you know, I restore old cars. And I had a friend of mine in Hartford, his alternator went bad in his Nissan Altima. And he couldn't afford the $200 for a new alternator, let alone the labor to put it in. I went to the junkyard. Well, what did I learn? There was a gentleman there who just was recently incarcerated, got out of prison, was trying to get his life back together. pulled a credit report on himself and found out that his identity had been stolen, and Eversource stuck an $8,000 lien on him. He never would have known this, but he came up to me because, hey, Ken, I understand you're a legislator. Can you help me? Well, we're working on that. I got, Eversource involved, explained it, got the paperwork together. This is why it is so important that you reach out to us, not only when you're upset about things, but also when you need help. But we're here, we're public servants. And I think the many, many hours that we spend in these public hearings show that. I know my colleagues all go over the line to make sure that they help people. So please make sure that you make your voice heard and reach out. We are approachable.
Representative Berger-Girvalo, did you have?
Yeah, one of the things that I was surprised by when I first began to receive emails and communications from constituents was, surprise isn't the right word. It was heartbreaking to see how many real people in my community are really hurting, and it's tough to read those emails, and it's tough to have those conversations on the phone. But I have also found that to be one of the most important things that we all do, is even if it's not something that is necessarily within our purview, to be able to have access to the department that can help you, the department that you were not able to reach, the just pointing you in the right direction, or being able to say, hey, we figured it out, here's your unemployment issue. Those kinds of things are so rewarding. But also it really is something that we are all happy to help and do. It's the worst part is seeing how much people are suffering, but the best part is being able to help them. So do definitely continue to reach out, even if you think it is not something that falls under what would normally be our responsibility or duty. It's something that it's important to each of us. I know that the three of us, it's certainly important. So that's the message. Just keep reaching out.
Okay, thank you for all those different ways that we can contact you. One other website that I have recently discovered is called Legiscan, Legiscan, and they have websites for each state in the United States. So there's one on the Connecticut General Assembly, and they track and give information about the bills before the legislature. So that's another website. Moving on to the fourth area for league questions, and the last area, can't pass this by, campaign finance and the Citizens Election Program. What is your personal experience with public financing of elections through the Citizens Election Program?
Well, I could touch on that. It's one of the, in fact, there's one thing that I put up every morning on my personal Facebook page. It's Today in Connecticut History, and it's something that is done by the historian for the state of Connecticut, and it's amazing to understand and know how much rich history that Connecticut has been involved with. But the one that came out 2 days ago was about John Rowland. It was about John Rowland. It was called "A Star Fell Twice," and it talked about the two times that he got jammed up in corruption. It was because of the actions of John Rowland that we looked into how money affects our elections, and how money can get the wrong people in the wrong place, and how that undue influence after money is put into the elections, how it affects what their actions are going to be. Under the guidance of Jody Rell and the Democratic legislature, they worked together to come up with the Citizens Elections Program. It's a great program. It does not take taxpayer money. It actually takes money from from unclaimed funds. So those nickels and dimes that you don't turn in for your cans and your soda, or they wind up going into this fund. Bank accounts that don't have anywhere to go, they go into this fund. But what they've done, good or bad, they've been given and available for people like myself to be your legislator. To have the everyday working guy who doesn't have a trust fund, who doesn't live in a big expensive house, who doesn't drive a brand new car, and doesn't have a lot of influence as far as lobbyist influence, be able to come and actually listen to you, because nobody's going to buy your influence for $200, $250, because they bumped it up for $100, so now it's $250. But it's a great program, and it gives all people, the person that donates $5 to your campaign has just as much influence as the person that gave you $250. And it's important that we keep it that way. It's a program I know that every year, and we'll probably hear about it again this year, that certain people want to get rid of. They want to take that money and they want to put it towards another cause in the general fund. But at the same time, they're just going to invite those corporate lobbyists and those special interests back into our lives. And your voice, your word will disappear and evaporate and be lost by the noise of the lobbyists. It's a lot more humbling to be able to go to. Will's got a little bit more of a higher lift, but us in the legislature, Aimee and myself, we have to go get 150 donations from people in our district and raise up to $5,000, usually go a bit more to get matching funds. Will unfortunately has to get 300 people and then $15,000 for his district. But those are the people that come out. Those 150 people have the voice. Whereas some of these people that have been up in Hartford forever that want to get rid of the program would rather just go over to talk to the Eversource guy, talk to the special interests at the hospital, talk to the drug companies, whatever, get a nice fat $20,000 check and say, I did all my fundraising in 4 days, I'm done, go on. So great program. I will always support the Citizens Elections program, even if somehow if I win the Powerball, I'm still gonna be here and be part of supporting this system. It's a great program.
I would just agree with what Ken had to say. It's ditto across the board. I don't want to waste time. I know we have a lot of other questions to get to. I would also simply add from a very practical perspective, it makes it much easier to focus on what is happening in your community. If I have to be on a phone trying to raise funds, trying to raise money to be able to campaign, to be able to get elected, then I don't have the time to also talk to you about what's important to you. And I mean, this is a girl who I never even like to ask for a raise. I don't like to ask for money. It's not comfortable for me. And I think for a lot of people, that's an issue as well. So the way that, we keep the playing field level for sure. And also from a very practical time saving standpoint, it's a wonderful program.
Senator Haskell.
I agree, and Ken referenced that this is always on the chopping block in Hartford. That drives me crazy because it's not very much money, but it's crucial to the well-functioning of our democracy. Representative government only works if it's representative, and a lot of people I know, myself included, wouldn't have been able to run for office if it required a substantial amount of personal investment or if it required having connections to wealthy donors. Instead, in Connecticut, we've got a system where anybody can run regardless of their financial circumstances because we've got publicly funded elections. Now, the system still isn't perfect. Legislators aren't really paid that much, meaning it's hard for working people to take this job. It's why I think we don't have enough women or people of color or young people in the legislature. We don't have a government that's fully representative, but Citizens Election Program brings us a huge step closer to a legislature that actually represents and reflects the people in the communities that it's supposed to represent.
Okay. Do any of you three have any suggestions on how you would improve the CEP program?
If I could, Will, were you going to say something?
You go first.
Oh, I actually am very excited about a bill that I just co-sponsored, which would allow working parents to use a portion of the grant to pay for childcare. Because to Will's point, this process can often include mothers, parents, single parents. It's going to open up that access, and so that's one area that I think desperately needs improvement.
I totally support that bill and look forward to voting for it in the GE committee. Mine is less maybe important, but I think just a little nuisance of the program that drives me crazy. Sometimes a donor will fill out the address incorrectly, or there'll be a small typo and the contribution will be rejected, and that's fine. It's not the end of the world. We can always, that's why we raise a little bit more than we need to. But when the contribution is rejected, it doesn't go back to the donor and it doesn't go to the campaign. It just goes to the state. And I think that that's unfair. If a contribution is rejected because it's invalid, it should go back to the person who made that contribution, in my opinion.
Representative Gucker?
All of the above.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes the questions from the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. Thank you all for your input. Now I'm going to move on to the questions from you constituents. And as I said, there were 25 total questions. We will try to get to as many of them as humanly possible. Our ending time as publicized today is at 11:30 a.m. this morning. First question that came in was about vaccines, submitted by Michael Lordy of Main Street in Ridgefield. It was my understanding that based on the arrangement between Connecticut and New York, a resident of one state who works in the other state can get vaccinated in the state where they work. This does not appear to be the case for Connecticut residents working in New York. The only way a Connecticut resident working in New York can get vaccinated is if they are an essential worker. New York residents over 65 or having comorbidity can get vaccinated in New York, but a Connecticut resident working in New York cannot. However, a New York resident over 55 working in Connecticut can get vaccinated in Connecticut. This does not seem fair, especially with limited appointment availability. Is my understanding correct? If so, why is Connecticut allowing New York residents working in Connecticut can get vaccinated without reciprocity from New York? If my understanding is not correct, what is the arrangement? How many New York residents have been vaccinated in Connecticut?
I'm happy to jump in if that's okay with my colleagues. My understanding was that if you lived in Connecticut but worked in New York and you became eligible in New York due to your employment, you would be eligible to get vaccinated there. And my understanding from constituents who find themselves in this situation is that some have been able to get vaccinated in New York. That being said, I will not purport to speak for what's happening across the border. There's a lot of crazy things happening in New York right now. What I can speak to is the fact that in Connecticut, our policy is if you live in Connecticut, you can get vaccinated here. And if you work in Connecticut, you can get vaccinated here. And why is that? It's because we're no better off if somebody who works in this community is unvaccinated, right? If somebody lives just across the border in New York but works in the Ridgefield public schools, we're not better off as a community if that teacher or that educator is going into the classroom unvaccinated. We as a community want to make sure that all of the folks who want to get vaccinated are able to do so. And look, there are imperfections in our system. If you are somebody who's 30 years old and has an underlying condition, I think you are understandably furious at the state of Connecticut that you have not yet been vaccinated because Connecticut pursued an age-based rollout. The benefit to Governor Lamont's decision, in my view, is that it's incredibly simple. And even though it can be frustrating for many, we've been a national leader in the number of people who have become vaccinated. Looking just at yesterday's numbers, Connecticut's administered 966,000 first doses. 536,000 people have been fully vaccinated. We've in total administered 1.4 doses. So Connecticut is getting shots into arms as quickly as it can. We're doing so by bringing down as many barriers as possible and simplifying the process. And it's possible that some folks who live in New York and work in Connecticut are becoming vaccinated here, and that may frustrate Connecticut residents who are waiting for their appointment. But ultimately, if they're working every day in our community, we want to make sure that those folks are vaccinated too, because it will keep all of us safe. I hope that answers the question, although some of the specifics on New York, I'm sorry that I can't answer.
Okay.
Just to add to what Will said, I think it's important. I think a lot of people don't understand how that decision process was made. And we all received many, many emails and phone calls wondering when it was their turn, how they could access, even help with just accessing VAMs and the other resources to try and get vaccinated. So while the legislature didn't vote on this process, I know that we have each advocated. I don't like to speak for you guys, but I know for a fact that all three of us have advocated to the governor's office, to the working group, the vaccine working group that does make all of these decisions on everyone's behalf. And we each were, I was as frustrated as Will is with you've got a comorbidity, you're 30, you don't qualify yet, and it is frustrating. But I think it's also important to note that here in Connecticut, one of the questions that I was concerned about when I knew that we were going to be getting more and more access to vaccine, when we were going to be getting the doses were increasing exponentially, was whether or not we had the infrastructure, whether or not we were going to be able to actually deliver those doses. And it has been really wonderful to see over the last few weeks, as those numbers are growing, that we really are getting, every time we think we know how many people we're going to be able to hit, we increase that. And so the access to vaccine is opening up tremendously. If you don't know already, 45 and up opened up the other day. Please make sure that you're getting out there and doing that, because we're only as, you know, the more of us that have that vaccine, the safer we're all going to be. But definitely, absolutely, we are prepared to continue to move our numbers quickly, and Connecticut is ranking very, very high consistently, within third and fourth in the country in terms of how many people we have vaccinated.
I just want to steal I agree with everything that's already been said, but I will also add one thing. There's one phrase that a colleague of mine here at Danbury uses. It's Representative Bob Godfrey, and uses this line that, you know, in dealing with this vaccine and dealing with COVID, he says, we are in the process of building the plane as we're flying it. We are in uncharted territories. We are in a place that we thought we would never be. You know, the United States has always been forefront on just about everything, but we kind of were, you know, really back on this, you know, and now that we're up and going, you know, many of these clinics, and I have family members that are working at these clinics, are coming across the problems of, how do you tell if somebody has got a pre-existing condition? How do you see if somebody's got a certain disability, or, you know, many of the loopholes that were put in place for good reasons. They were very happy when the governor went to an age-based system, because you walk in, you show your license, good, it's ready to go. Because there were people, unfortunately, with sometimes in society, we have people that are more concerned about themselves than the general public, and they go in there, well, yeah, I do smoke 20 packs of cigarettes a day. Yeah, I do this. Yeah, I do that. And they try to jump the line. You know, the other problem has been, and it's been a nightmare, is the van system with dealing with setting up for these appointments. But part of the problem has been that members of the community have gone and set up 3, 4, or 5 appointments to try to hope to get the best, you know, to get in earlier. But what that's done is they don't go back and delete the other 4 or 3 that they signed up for. So the clinic is sitting there with, you know, a defrosted vat ready to give out a vaccine, and nobody's showing up to do that. You know, so they've been working extra hard. And I have to give a lot of credit to our vaccine clinics. They've been able to squeeze out an extra 20, 30, 40 doses out of their deliveries. You know, some of the vials every vial usually has about 5 doses in it. They've been able to squeeze out 6 sometimes, because there's a little bit of extra. And they're making sure, because they want to make sure that not a single drop is wasted, that we all get there. So as frustrating as it is, and, you know, we could probably, you know, maybe come up with it. Hopefully we never have to go through this again. But if there was in the future, we maybe come up with a different system. But we all have to get there together. We all have to work together. And you know what? You know, I was offered a vaccine. I've had my first one. I'm waiting for my second one, which is next Friday. But I also, when I was called, said, are there any senior citizens, or are there any special needs? Are there other people that are more deserving than I? Because I have been very safe, and I have been, you know, living the way we should be. But that being said, everybody's going to get there. The governor and the state of Connecticut has been the leader in this. And as much as here it's frustrating, again, we're building the airplane while we're flying it.
Okay, a follow-up question to vaccine. When will we reach herd immunity so businesses can open and we can go to restaurants, movies, amusement parks, historic sites, etc.? Asked by Ted McCormick of Ridgefield.
You got it, Will. I was about to jump in, but I keep feeling like I'm stepping on you.
You go. I'll go next.
I mean, it's hard to say. Herd immunity is achieved when we hit between 70 and 80% vaccinated. We're seeing estimates that perhaps this summer, but it really depends on whether everyone is willing to vaccinate themselves. So if you have any hesitation, I would invite you to reach out to me, and I will share with you whatever information that I have from medical professionals, from those who have studied epidemiology, those who've studied these vaccines. I would encourage everyone to get vaccinated, because that's how we're going to reach herd immunity, and that's how we're going to begin to return to whatever form of normal we'll ever see.
Yeah, I would just add that, Ted, it's probably a question for somebody with an MD next to their name, which is not one of us. But I will say that in Connecticut, we vaccinated 78% of people over the age of 75. And we know that 96% of deaths in Connecticut, more than 80% of deaths in Connecticut took place among those over the age of 75. 96% of deaths took place among people over the age of 65. And we've now vaccinated 74% of that population. All that to say that in the first week of April, everyone's going to become eligible. That's not to say that everybody's going to get vaccinated in the first week of April. It'll probably be, you'll be scheduling a few weeks out. But we're on pace for later this spring for supply to actually perhaps exceed demand, which is a totally different scenario than the one that we've been in. I will say, though, with regard to your question about reopening in restaurants and museums, just yesterday, the governor rolled back a lot of those restrictions. So you still need to maintain 6 feet of social distancing, but most of the capacity limits, whether it's at gyms or restaurants or even certain live theater venues, have been lifted. If you're looking for more information, go to ct.gov/coronavirus or any one of our websites. March 19th was the effective date for most of those changes. So you'll start to see a little bit of return to normalcy. Please don't take your foot off, or don't take your eye off of social distancing and wearing a mask, because we know that COVID-19 is still very much in this community, including 2 dangerous variants.
Representative Gucker.
Yes, everything that's already been said, and you're right. And even if you get the vaccine, you still have to wait 20 days with your mask on even after you get it. So you know what? Just because you get that shot in the arm doesn't mean you can run outside. And as much as you would love to hug your neighbors, and just give it a couple more weeks, and let's make sure we all get there. And herd immunity, yes, Will is right. Neither one of us are doctors here, and I don't even play one on TV because I try not to. But the thing is that we get there when we all get that shot, and we all work together on this, because it will require the majority of us, if not all of us, to get that vaccine to get there. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to, a nice sunny day. We're not going to wake up and say, hey, we're all cured, it's ready to go. We all have to do our part, and we all have to go get that vaccine.
Okay. This is regarding House Bill 6425, Aid in Dying for Terminally Ill Patients. To enable terminally ill patients with less than 6 months to live the ability to get a prescription from their doctor to end their suffering was finally voted out of committee. I would like to ask the 3 legislators how they will vote on this bill. Thank you, from Anita Lindsay. This is House Bill 6425.
I'm happy to jump in on that one right away if that's okay with you guys. This bill has come to mean a lot to me. This has come through the Public Health Committee. It has been one that we spent many hours in hearings, lots of discussion on this. I have spoken to so many family members of people who have suffered through unimaginable end-of-life experiences. It's actually hard to talk about some of the things that I have heard and some of the stories that have been told. I have co-sponsored this bill, and as a result of those conversations, I respect those with strong moral objections, religious, whatever the objection is to that, and I do take very seriously whatever objections you may have to the bill. But we have to continue to have compassion and understanding for those who are in this position, who are terminally ill, living in perpetual pain, suffering, and not able to find any relief and no quality of life. And to understand that this bill is an option. It provides an option. There are strict requirements. There are safeguards. And in 20 years of this law being, the law was passed in Oregon 20 years ago, there are no cases of coercion. There are no cases of abuse. There are no cases of lawsuits. 74% of Americans are in support of this. And everyone who has, not everyone, the majority of people who have reached out to me within our own community are asking for this. In fact, this week, I believe on Tuesday, New Mexico became the 11th state to pass this legislation, and I am very hopeful that Connecticut will be the 12th. Anybody else?
I might add to that this is actually the second time that I've experienced this bill, and I supported it last time, will support it this time, but I have a different story. I didn't need to hear, I don't serve on public health or any of the other committees that are dealing with this right now. I lived this with a relative. I've watched the horrific things that happen and the pain and the suffering. And it's the most heart-wrenching thing, because no matter how compassionate you are, no matter how much you love or how much care you give to that person, to walk out of that hospital room just devastated. It's something I don't wish on anybody. It is horrific. And for those reasons, before I get teary-eyed on it, because it is a personal matter, I will be supporting this bill. I supported it last time. I understand people's religious, opposition to it. That's their choice. But again, I've lived it, I've seen it, and I think it's time that we give people, a little more control back in their life to decide when they've suffered enough. And it's not something that's just going to be handed out to anybody. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get to this point. So I will be supporting it.
Senator Haskell.
Ken, thank you for sharing that. I feel as though the only thing I can add is to say that the specifics of this bill are, I support the legislation 100%. I introduced it, in fact, and I'm a co-sponsor of the bill that's moved through the Public Health Committee. I believe that those who are in the final chapter of their life ought to have the dignity and the personal choices to define their own last days and pass in a manner of their choosing. And this is a bill that I think sounds scarier than it actually is in practice. If you dig in to the details, you have to have a 6-month terminal diagnosis. You need to be an adult who's competent, who's a resident of the state. You need to voluntarily express your wish to receive aid and dying, and there needs to be 2 written requests and 2 oral requests and 1 written request with 2 witnesses attesting to the fact that you're of sound mind and acting voluntarily. And then after that, you can't just do it with 1 doctor. You then have to see a consulting physician who's going to examine whether or not you're acting voluntarily and of sound mind and judgment, and if you're suffering from any psychological or psychiatric conditions. So it is a safe bill that builds upon what has worked well in other states. And I think it's so critically important that those who are suffering from that terminal diagnosis have the opportunity to spend their last days with dignity. So we've got to get this bill across the finish line this year.
Okay, thank you. This is on taxes and spending cuts. We see a lot of new legislation focused on new taxes and additional spending. What specific legislation have you proposed for this session that is focused on spending cuts, and what would the potential amounts of the cuts be that would save the taxpayers money? This is from, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing the last name, Deborah Francassini Gotchi.
I'm happy to jump in there. Deborah, thanks so much for your question. One thing that I've supported as a member of the Judiciary Committee is closing Northern Correctional Facility. It costs taxpayers almost $13 million annually to operate this prison, the Supermax prison, and it's frankly unnecessary. We've got the lowest population of incarcerated people that we've had in Connecticut in 32 years. So we can save a lot of money every year by closing that facility, and that's included in Governor Lamont's budget. And then more broadly, I've been working with Governor Lamont and his administration on a whole host of government modernization tools that are going to not only make life easier for constituents in terms of, achieving government efficiency and getting the job done online, but also, perhaps most importantly, resulting in cost savings for taxpayers. Take the Department of Consumer Protection, for example. The Lamont administration has moved 245 operational licenses online. That's about 80% of all state license renewals. Same thing with DMV. We're moving more and more DMV functions online. And you can say that's long overdue, but I encourage you to dig into the state budget and see all the operational cost savings. It actually adds up to tens of millions of dollars every year that's going to be saved by building a government that's frankly more befitting of the 21st century.
I'm glad that Will brought up the governor's budget. There's so much talk, there's so much concern about taxes and spending. The governor's proposed budget doesn't increase sales or income taxes. A lot of potential revenues are going to come from things that don't currently exist. including an agreement that seems to have been reached now with sports betting and potential legalization of marijuana. After a year of this pandemic, we're finally getting meaningful federal relief as well, with a fiscal climate that's gradually improving, a budget reserve fund that's at capacity, thanks to Democratic fiscal policies, and millions of dollars coming from Washington. I don't think we have to worry about taxes increasing, certainly not here in Ridgefield. Regarding specific legislation, I've sponsored legislation that would save money through sustainable building practices, energy efficiency, and building out green infrastructure, which is a very strong focus of mine. And I've supported adequately funding tourism, which is a huge piece in our community that has a high return on investment for us. And then there are some other smaller entrepreneurial friendly proposals that that would ease licensing and help small, like food trucks and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of opportunity here. I think that we all get really, really frightened when we hear about taxes. And I think it is significantly more unfounded this session than it has been in the past.
Senator Gucker.
So I agree with everything that has been said before. I guess is one of the benefits of going third most of the time, is I get to agree with what's been said. But the other thing I will add, and I've said this at every league meeting that we've had, you know, there's always this idea we need to cut, we need to cut, we need to cut. But yet we found out in this pandemic about how bad that has been for Connecticut. How many people could not get their unemployment done? How many people couldn't register their cars and couldn't do basic government because the systems were cut, the programs were scuttled. You know, if you saw the computer system that motor vehicles working under, I mean, your iPhone has more capability than the Department of Motor Vehicles computer system. You know, the stuff with unemployment. I mean, it's time that though we need to cut and we need to watch our spending, we also need to reinvest back into Connecticut. So like we're doing now with motor vehicle, you can now get your driver's license online. That is something you couldn't do before this. It requires some investment back into our government to make things more convenient. You know, our unemployment, I'm sure once we're through this, our unemployment system is going to be relooked at. A lot of services that we rely on and require to go forward are being shown that cutting is not always the answer. And I'm not saying to go out and, you know, crack open the credit card and let's go, you know, run around and go on a spending spree. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is for Connecticut to do better, to attract businesses, to bring more people in, and to do the very things that we want, we need to make government more accessible. But we also need to make our services more accessible. And that is going to require some investment. After years and years and years of cutting things to the bone, it's time that we start giving back some and make things better. And as we know, as things get better, more people will be willing to use it. And maybe if we can move more things online, we won't need so much overhead. We'll actually be saving in the end. It's almost like that decision, do I buy a new car or buy the old car? Well, geez, the old car needs an engine and a transmission, and it needs all this extra work. How much is this going to cost me? Or you know what, I'll take a short-term loan and get a new car. And in the end, it's going to save me more money. So I think that's where we really need to be thinking going forward.
Okay, the next two questions are on wine sales in grocery stores. I would like each legislator to share their thoughts on the proposed for grocery stores to sell wine. This is from Lily Schroep. And there is another question. Please comment on the proposed legislation to allow big box stores to sell wine. This will be harmful to the small businesses in Ridgefield and other towns in Connecticut that sell wine. Please vote against such a proposal. Thank you, Sabina Slavin.
I'll go first this time so that everybody hopefully can say they agree with me. If not, they can correct me. I am adamantly opposed to this. This bill came up about, God, I want to say about 10 years ago. So I think it was in my district. In fact, it wasn't even the 138th district at that time. So it was before we had the redistricting. I used to live in the 109th district. And at that time, it was State Representative Joseph Tabersack. And he had gotten together with the small businesses dealing with liquor stores to discuss this. All this does is it takes away the mom and pop stores. All this does is hurts the small businesses, the very people that support our communities, the very people that when you go to their store and purchase something, that they go to the store next door to buy their groceries, or they go down the street to the hardware store and they buy their materials, or they keep, studies have shown that the money stays locally, it stays in the community. These box stores, the money goes to some corporate entity in Georgia or some other location. It doesn't come back into the area. I'm adamantly opposed to anything, and being a small business owner, I have a good reason why, of hurting the small guy, the little guy. We should not allow this. It is nothing more than just a big box store takeover. We've seen that with the Lowe's. We've seen that with Home Depot. We've seen that with a lot of these, the Walmarts have come in and just squeezed out the little guy. And now those small businesses have to find another way to survive. I'm opposed to it. I will not support this bill. And I was very much of an advocate against this, even though I wasn't in the legislature a long, long time ago.
I would agree with Ken completely. I'm in opposition as well. I have one of the arguments that has been pushed back is that this would be an opportunity to get local wineries into grocery stores. I think we should take that opportunity to get local wineries into the mom and pop stores. I do not see this as a job creator. I see this only as robbing our local stores and giving to the big boxes. And so I stand firmly opposed as well.
Yeah, my colleague said it well. This is a time when we should be doing everything that we can to help small businesses in the midst of this trying economic time. I'm not at all convinced that this would help small businesses. It seems to me that it would go in the opposite direction. It would in fact hurt small businesses, as the question alluded to. So I share my colleague's opinion on this issue.
Okay. As I understand it, there are 6 bills before the legislature dealing with local zoning. And I'm going to, in the interest of saving time, Linda Lavelle asked a question about local zoning. Gil Mott asked a question about local zoning. 2 questions came in on the library registration that did not have the name. And there is a question from Colette Kabakasalian about local zoning. And it's, will you vote yes or no to the myriad bills proposed to change local zoning laws? Straight answer, please. No situation analysis. Another one frames it. You all promised during your campaign to vote against any changes to zoning laws. Please reaffirm this confirmation on this call. So as I said, there were 6 people who asked the question, and in the interest of time, I have just brought it down to the simplest way to ask the question. Local zoning. 6 bills before you in the legislature.
So this is the very reason why we didn't get any sleep for 24 hours straight and then went into session. And unfortunately, only 200 of the 351 people were able to testify because this is such a hot issue. The reason why that I am in the legislature is because of zoning issues. In fact, I was fighting a zoning issue here in Danbury that was not good for the community not more than a couple weeks ago. The bill that has the most concern to me is Bill 1024. I'm having a real hard time finding the logic in it. At this point, I cannot support it the way it is written. I have real problems with many of the pieces that are in it. And it also has a negative recommendation from the town of New Fairfield, the town of Ridgefield, the city of Danbury, and Westcog doesn't support it. So as your voice going forward, at this point, I cannot support them.
I would agree with what Ken said. Not serving in those committees, it's not something that I haven't been able to participate in the hearings, but I have gone back and I have listened to a lot of the testimony. I do still maintain that local control is critical, and I stand by that. I have met with our local planning and zoning chair and adore her, and I have spoken to chairs and legislators from communities surrounding ours, and have heard from Westcog, as Ken referenced. Most of the proposals that are in planning and development, they're not even really addressing what it is that needs to be addressed. I don't believe that affordable housing is the silver bullet to the desegregation conversation. If we don't have jobs here, no one's going to live here anyway. And one of the things, though, that I do think it's important to say is I am a little worried about some of the rhetoric around this conversation. When you hear people start to talk about protecting the character of a town, it does start to sound like racism, and even if it's just dog whistle racism. And I am deeply concerned with the way that this is being politicized. When the language that I'm hearing from some folks is using terms like those people, or saying things like the quality of our neighborhoods affects the value of our homes, I don't think that we're seeing eye to eye on this. I do want to have conversations with you, and I respond to every single email that I get. I know that that was in question, and I know that my colleagues do as well. If you ask me about zoning, I will tell you, I don't believe that any of the bills that are currently being discussed are going to help with the issues that we have. But what I do want is to hear from our community about what you think can help. Just throwing up walls and saying that we can't fix this through zoning, I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But what I would love is for our community to come together and show how wonderful we really are, and not be so afraid of having some really difficult conversations. Last week, the House Majority Leader, I want to get his quote right, so I have this written down. The House Majority Leader, Jason Rojas, he said, if our children don't go to school together, if we don't worship together on Sundays, if our children don't play in the same youth sports leagues, if we aren't neighbors, it's nearly impossible to see each other's humanity. I don't want zoning to be a thing that stops us from seeing each other's humanity. Is it going to solve this problem of affordable housing? Absolutely not. But we have to look each other in the eye, and we have to say, these are the things that we have to deal with. How are we going to deal with them? So I am open to solutions, whether you agree with me, disagree with me on anything. If you have some thoughts on what we need to do to address the problems that we have statewide, please come to me and tell me what they are. But let's be cautious, and let's learn. Let's look at these bills together. If you go and explore the many bills that are proposed about this, I think that you'll find what communities that don't look like ours are struggling with, and I think that's information that we should all be armed with.
Senator Haskell.
So I'm so glad that these questions come up, because there are a variety of bills. There are bills in the Housing Committee. I don't anticipate that those particularly as it results to zoning control going to a nearby city, I don't anticipate that that bill is going to move forward. There's a bill in my committee, in the Transportation Committee, that was drafted before I received the gavel as chairman. It's going to be substantially revised, I can tell you that. And then there are bills in the Planning and Development Committee. And I have to admit, I don't serve on the Housing or the Planning and Development Committee, so I can't speak to all the specifics, but I have been in really frequent contact with Rebecca, our wonderful P&Z chairman, about these issues to get Ridgefield's feedback. Look, if I'm being really honest, it's a shame to me that an organization called Desegregate CT has become such a lightning rod for partisanship this session, because some of what they're proposing makes sense, makes all the sense in the world, I think, to almost everybody, right? Accessory dwelling units, that's something that Ridgefield already allows. Why shouldn't somebody be allowed to rent out their cottage or the apartment next to their garage? Model zoning regulations, they're optional, and they save towns money, because a town like Ridgefield wouldn't have to hire consultants, or Westport, my community, wouldn't have to hire consultants as they develop those zoning regulations. Training for planning and zoning commissioners, that's a pretty bipartisan idea that exists in so many other states. The really thorny issues, they center around multifamily development around Main Street and near train stations. It's important for me, critically important, that any bill that moves forward it gives towns the ability to continue to regulate height and architectural design and setback and all of the zoning regulations that are already given to towns in Section 8-2 of our general statutes. And it's also really important to me that the housing that this creates is actually affordable for young people like myself who are struggling right now to afford to live in Fairfield County, for seniors who can't afford to retire here, for teachers and police officers who too often can't manage to live in the same community in which they work because of the high cost of housing. But the good news is if you dig into this bill, particularly 1024, Ridgefield actually already meets some of the standards in this bill. I don't think it's going to pass as written, and I certainly would like to see substantial revisions to it. But 50% of the radius around our Main Street that is required is actually already zoned for multifamily housing. So I don't see this having, I don't see that section as being as problematic as some of the partisan social media posts that I've seen chalk it up to be. Look, on the campaign trail, I told you that you can support local zoning regulations and also support the creation of more affordable housing. Ridgefield has been doing just that. This town has been looking for creative opportunities to create more housing for seniors, for students, and everybody in between. I continue to reject the idea that local control and affordable housing are mutually exclusive. And to be crystal clear, as a right, which is what 10-20, what SB 1024 entails, all it means is that there doesn't need to be a public hearing. Town hall would still have the power, the obligation, in fact, to review every potential development and ensure that it satisfies all the zoning regulations that they're empowered to enact, like I said, by 8-2 of our general statutes. Look, I saw the questions from the community. I know there's a lot of pressure right now to say, absolutely, yes, you'll vote for this, or absolutely, no, you won't vote for this. Generally, this is my third year in Hartford now. I don't promise my constituents that I'll vote one way or another on a bill this early in the process, because if you know anything about legislating, you know that these bills change dramatically. I could sit here and promise you today that I'm going to vote against 1024, but what if that bill becomes instead a vehicle to give towns more money to develop sewage around their train stations like Branchville? I'd really want to vote for that bill. But I also wouldn't want to have lied to my constituents and communities. So the promise I can make to you today, that I'm going to continue talking to the P&Z commissioners like Rebecca. I'm going to continue talking to our first selectman, and I am going to carefully consider any legislation that comes across my desk. But we're a long way off from there. This is just a bill that's in the Planning and Development Committee. It had a public hearing, but it hasn't even been voted out of committee yet.
Okay, thank you all. The other question that had multiple questions was the open choice program. Gilbert Mott asked a question. There was another question posted on the registration without a name. And Skylar Kleiman asked a question about what is your position on the open choice program, which allows suburban school districts with declining enrollment to voluntarily offer seats to students from overcrowded urban districts. Do you support this program for Ridgefield, and how will it be paid for? And will it increase? No. Will class sizes increase because of this?
I would love to jump in since I introduced this legislation with some of my colleagues. So let me start by saying this is an entirely voluntary program. All the state statute that we're looking to pass would do is enable Ridgefield to take advantage of the open choice program. Right now, there are 42 districts across the state of Connecticut that take advantage of open choice. It serves a little more than 3,000 students. And what is open choice? It essentially says that in an urban community, for example, Bridgeport, if they're suffering from overcrowding, well, then some of their students can participate in a lottery system that allows them to go to school in a nearby suburb that has declining enrollment. My hometown of Westport has participated in the open choice program for decades. So year to year, Westport says, hey, we've got a slight dip in enrollment this year. It doesn't cost any more money for the taxpayers to add a student into a seat of a classroom that would otherwise have gone empty, right? The teacher's salary is paid for, all the books are paid for, the smartboard at the head of the classroom is paid for, the school and heating and cooling of the school building is all paid for. So the marginal cost of adding a student into that empty seat is de minimis. Why not accept students who are currently in districts that are struggling with overcrowding to even out our own enrollment and provide some incredible opportunities in these world-class school districts? And by the way, what we've seen in towns that participate is that there really is a dual benefit. Of course, there's a benefit to the student who gains access to these exceptional public schools, but there's also a benefit to the students in Westport who get to experience more socioeconomic and racial diversity in the classroom. I think our public schools, whether it's Ridgefield or Westport, they do a great job of preparing students for college in nearly every way but one. Something that I felt as a young person graduating from the Westport public schools, and something that I hear from young people in Ridgefield, is that they feel as though they're growing up in a bubble. And frankly, they're sometimes unprepared for the diversity that they encounter when they enter their first job or when they step onto a college campus. We know that students learn more and they actually learn better when they're in classrooms that are diverse. So creating that diversity, even if it's just a little bit at first, I think is a really important benefit to the hosting community. Now, how is it paid for? That's a really great question. There is a grant provided by the state of Connecticut to a district, depending on how many students they accept. It's anywhere between $2,000 and $8,000. That covers sort of the marginal cost of adding a student to the classroom. Who pays for the transportation from Bridgeport to Westport? That's paid for by the state of Connecticut. And what if a student requires additional services? What if the student who happens to gain that seat through the lottery requires special education services or an IEP? That additional cost is paid for by the district that sent them. So it's paid for by Bridgeport. It's not paid for by Westport. Would it increase class sizes? Absolutely not. The districts only accept as many students as they have open seats. It actually stabilizes enrollment and stabilizes spending. When you have a huge amount of volatility, sometimes teachers either have to be laid off, or if their contract doesn't allow, you've got more people employed than you actually need. By creating some level of stability year to year, school districts are actually able to better account for their finances, and it's not an additional cost to taxpayers. All this legislation would do is say, right now the program exists in Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport and New London. Let's bring this program to Danbury and to Norwalk so that nearby districts can decide whether or not they would like to participate. And First Selectman Rudy Marconi has been a champion on this. I hope that Ridgefield decides to participate, but know that it's not my decision. It's yours. It's the Board of Education and it's the superintendent. I know that some districts that I represent, like Wilton and Reading, are really eager to start accepting students from Danbury. I hope that Ridgefield will decide to do the same because, as I think my colleague, Representative Gucker, can attest, Danbury schools are struggling with overcrowding right now. And this could provide a life-changing opportunity for the students in those districts to gain access to the wonderful Ridgefield public schools. It just makes all the sense in the world. When one town just across the border has decline in enrollment and the other town just across the border has increase in enrollment, why wouldn't we open up some of those seats at no cost to taxpayers? The state's literally picking up the tab here. So anyways, that's my pitch on the open choice program.
Jumping in on that, Will, you're so good. You always call us Representative Berger-Girvalo and Gucker, and I jump right to first names. I apologize. Senator Haskell. I've been a Ridgefield Public Schools parent for a lot of years, and so many times we've had conversations about potentially closing the school, which means redistricting our kids, school bus times longer, all of that. This could be in the answer to that. I mean, we're always concerned about dropping enrollment, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity. As a parent, I completely support it. And as a legislator, I can say with confidence that it is helpful for people who like to your point. Well, I think it is helpful for people to learn with people of varying socioeconomic backgrounds. It promotes critical thinking and diversity of thought. I will just add, and so that we can move on, because I know that we're running out of time. I have actually advocated for towns who opt in to be able to receive 8-30G credits for every student that they enroll in open choice. So I am certainly hopeful that Ridgefield will take part in this. I am encouraged by some of the conversations that I've had with some of the members of the Board of Education and with families in our community. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for our community, as it would be for Danbury.
So as the state rep in between both of these areas, both New Fairfield and Ridgefield, and being somebody that lives 2 miles away from the largest high school in the state of Connecticut with over 3,200 students, over 53 languages being spoken. As a graduate from New Fairfield, knowing how the school system works, and actually it's kind of funny when Will or Aimee brought up about schools opening and closing. Part of the way I paid myself to get through college was working at the Barlow Mountain YMCA, which was a school, which became a YMCA, which is now a school again. This yo-yo back and forth, having that experience. Look, Will is absolutely right. And we're not talking about a lot of students here. The contract we have right now on this voluntary thing is 50 students. And if you think about it, if New Fairfield takes 25 kids from New Fairfield, Ridgefield could take 25 kids from Danbury, and that would be the end of it. It's an opt-in situation. But let's look at the bigger numbers. What's the other alternative? Building another school at bonding rates. Danbury gets a 70% reimbursement on a school. we have to put in a new school for these 100 kids or these 50 kids. The cost of the state of Connecticut far exceeds what it would cost to do this open choice program. But also, I've got neighborhoods in New Fairfield, in Danbury actually, that you have to drive into New Fairfield to get to them. The school bus taking those kids to Danbury, Danbury Public Schools has to drive into the town of New Fairfield to get there. So why not, if you have to drive to New Fairfield, why not have a school bus that's from New Fairfield pick up those very kids and take them there? The infrastructure is already there. The kids already play in the same neighborhoods. I've got communities where the district line literally goes down the middle of their road. The town line goes literally down the road. So I think it's a great program. And I know I see the clock is running down, and I don't want to burn up too much on this. But again, I think it's a good program. I think it's something that we should seriously be looking into. And the last thing, just think about the school construction, because we are all paying for that.
Okay, do we have time for one more quick question? Okay, and I also want to say Tara Talbot was also an asker of question. I omitted her name when I was giving you the question askers for the open choice program. Statewide property tax. Will you vote in favor of, and why, the imposition of additional increased tax burden on many of your constituents via a statewide property tax on residential real property above certain values? Asked by Thomas Olkowski from Ridgefield.
All right, I'm on. No, there's no guarantee in any of the bills that I've seen that any of the money would return to Ridgefield or be spent on affordable housing. So at this point, my answer is just a straight no.
Same here. That's easy. No, I don't think that this would be good for our real estate market at the current moment, and I don't think that this is a good idea. So I will not support it.
Representative Gucker.
It's going to be really hard but no, I'm not supporting it.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, to Representative Berger-Girvalo, Representative Gucker, and Senator Haskell for your time this morning. I think that you have made it apparent that you are very willing to hear from your constituents. There are lots of different ways your constituents can get in touch with you. I thank you for making yourself available at the Meet Your Legislature event sponsored by the League of Women Voters. And thank you to the participants, and thank you to all of the community members in Ridgefield who submitted questions. We got through as many as we could. There are always questions. Keep them coming, and you can ask your legislators individually. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Leslie, for being our air traffic controller. It's
Welcome.
Wonderful working with you. And back to Marilyn.
Thank you all, and I want to remind you your representatives have told you to contact them anytime. Google their names and you can find their information. So please contact your legislators. If your question didn't get answered, just send it right on to them. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. Thank you again to the library for being a co-sponsor, and thank you our legislators for working so hard for all of us. And we wish you a good morning. Thank you.
Okay,
Or good
thank you.
afternoon.
Go out and enjoy the wonderful sunny day.
Thanks to the league.
Spring.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
You're very